You know, it's a heavy thought, but have you ever considered that one of the most powerful things God can do is nothing at all? Just let go? Today we're going to dive into this really tough concept of divine abandonment, what it means when God decides to simply step back. It's a sobering idea for sure, so let's get right into the sources and try to understand how this even happens.
And it all kicks off with this line from the scriptures that is honestly pretty chilling. Leave him alone. The sources are really clear. This isn't some command shouted in a moment of anger. No, it's described as this calm, settled judicial verdict. So the real question is, what on earth could lead to a moment like this?
So, what does it actually mean to be left alone by God? Well, the sources we're looking at suggest it's not some sudden, impulsive act. It's a process, a really profound, consequential process. And maybe the most surprising part, it doesn't actually start with God. It starts with us.
Okay, so the first thing we absolutely have to get is this. The whole thing kicks off with humanity turning away. It starts with a conscious choice to reject what you know is true. The sources describe it as a very active decision, not just, passively drifting away.
The text from Romans says people did not see fit to acknowledge God. Now, we're not talking about a lack of evidence here. We're talking about a deliberate refusal. And that is the very heart of what the sources call idolatry. It's this deep spiritual unfaithfulness where you put something else in God's rightful place. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. The original Greek word here for see fit or approve is dokimazo. This was a word they used for testing metals, to see if a coin was real, if it was up to standard. So what the text is saying, believe it or not, is that humanity put God on trial, they examined him, and they decided he wasn't valuable enough to keep around. They literally disapproved of him. And as you can imagine, a choice that big, it has an equally big consequence. The divine response isn't described as some fiery burst of anger. It's presented as a formal, almost judicial act. The texts call it a giving over. And this is where that idea of abandonment really starts to take shape.
In the first chapter of Romans, this phrase, God gave them over, shows up 3 separate times. It's like the deliberate bang of a judge's gavel. The first time, it's a direct result of that idolatry we just talked about. The text says God gives people over to impurity and sexual immorality. Basically, he removes the divine restraint and just hands them over to the desires they've already chosen.
The second gavel strike, well, it marks an even deeper descent. Once they've been given over to immorality, the text says God then gives them over to dishonorable passions, turning against the natural order. It's shown as a clear progression, right? A deeper slide once those first restraints are gone.
And the third and final time is the most profound. Here, God gives them over to a reprobate mind. See, at this point, it's not just about what you're doing anymore. The very tool you use for moral judgment becomes corrupted. Your ability to even tell right from wrong starts to dissolve.
And check this out, because the wordplay in the original language is just, wow, it's so powerful. Mankind did not approve God. They tested him, dokimazo, and said nope. So the consequence, God gave them over to a mind that is disapproved, a dokimos. The punishment is an exact, perfect mirror of the sin. A mind that rejects God becomes itself a rejected mind.
And this isn't some new idea that just popped up in Romans. The Psalms echo this exact same thought. God withdrawing his hand and just letting people chase what they're already chasing. He gives them up to follow their own plans, to see for themselves where their own advice leads them.
So what does this path actually look like when it plays out? The sources lay out a pretty clear 3-stage downward spiral into total societal chaos when a culture is given over.
All right, so this downward spiral laid out in the text, it follows this really chilling but logical path. It starts with immorality, which is shown as a direct outcome of rejecting the Creator. From there, it moves into a turning against the natural order. And the final stage, that's the complete corruption of the mind itself, which leads to the state of depravity where a society's moral compass is just totally broken.
And the result of all this? It's a society that's just completely unglued. The sources list all these devastating symptoms. Trust just evaporates. Murder and deceit become common. Even foundational relationships, like in families, they start to crack and fall apart. Pride replaces mercy, and simple affection gives way to cruelty. It's a picture of total societal breakdown, and it's all traced back to that first choice to just turn away.
But wait a minute. You have to ask, right? Is this abandonment just punishment, or could there be something else going on here?
The sources actually suggest that even inside this awful judgment, God can be working towards a much bigger redemptive goal.
I mean, think about the story of Joseph and his brothers. It's the perfect example. His brothers did what they did out of pure evil, jealousy, hatred, you name it. And yet God used their sinful choices to end up saving their entire family and a lot of other people from a devastating famine.
So here's the absolute key takeaway from the sources on this. God can work sovereignly through the free and, yes, sinful choices of people to bring about his good and redemptive plans, all without ever causing or approving of the sin itself. And the ultimate example of this? The crucifixion. Humanity's most evil act becomes the very thing God uses to bring about his greatest good for everyone.
And this right here brings us to the most important part of this whole conversation. Because this downward spiral, this state of being given over, it is not a final sentence. There is a way back. There is a message of profound hope here.
This idea is captured so powerfully in another text. After listing a bunch of these same destructive behaviors, the Apostle Paul writes to the believers in Corinth and he says this, "And such were some of you." The key word, the most powerful word in that whole sentence is were, past tense. It shows that no matter how far down that spiral you've gone, it's not a permanent address. It can be reversed through what the text calls being washed, sanctified, and justified. So for anyone listening who feels lost in these kinds of patterns, this is the essential takeaway. This state of abandonment is the consequence of a choice, yes, but a new choice can lead to complete restoration. It is not an irreversible doom. The same God who judicially gives people over is also the one waiting with open arms to welcome them back.
So let's bring it full circle, back to that idea of approval. If disapproving of God leads to a disapproved mind, what do you think happens when a person turns back and chooses to approve him, to value him, to welcome him back into their knowledge? Well, the sources suggest the entire process just works in reverse, leading not to chaos, but to renewal. And the question that leaves us with is, what does that renewal look like in a life or even in a whole society? Now that is something we're thinking about.